Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Burning Desire Show. It has been some time, and I apologize for that, but I've had other priorities. But now I've got a super interesting guest to make up for that. And I originally thought your name was Martin, but I think it's Marton. Is that the phrase?
Marton, yes, it's Hungarian.
Hungarian. Marton
Hungarian.
Radkai, or am I pronouncing that incorrect?
Radkai, that's correct. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, so so how I've come across Marton is because actually it so happens it was my a friend of mine that showed me these wristwatch annuals. And just to show you what those are, they are like pretty hefty, like coffee table type books full of watch brands and prices and movements and all different specifications that you can imagine.
With
Um,
articles up front.
yes,
That's
articles up front and like
true.
and also definitions at the back and all these things. And for those that are listening and can't see what I just showed, if you go on Amazon or whatever or Google, you type in wristwatch annual, you'll see what it's all about. It's kind of like an encyclopedia of watches. It's just the best if you're into watches in any way, shape, or form. And just I'll plug it later as well, but I believe the 2023 version is out on the 16th of May. Is that correct, or is it due to
Yeah,
change?
yeah. That should be. We're finishing it today. Actually, today this week is the last. It was supposed to be done earlier, but publishing is publishing.
I got you. I got you. So
Yeah,
I always like to these. So that's how I came about you, and I just shot you, and I think a message on LinkedIn asking if you'd be interested in an interview. But I always like to start with someone's background and like how they got into this, maybe. So, I had a look into your background, and interesting to say the least. Quite a lot of time in radio, correct?
yeah, yeah. I actually came rather late to watches. I for ages, I didn't wear a watch. It's not so much. Well, my one of my watches that I had, I left on the corner of a piano in Middlebury College when I was practicing, and when I went to get it an hour later, it was gone.
Oh.
And so I didn't get a watch after that. I did have a Seiko quartz, which I still have, by the way. It works every now and then it stops. But yeah, I didn't get into watches late. I actually started. The whole story is when I was a child, I really fell in love with classical music, and I wanted to become a pianist. And then I realized, did a few uh, exams at the Royal College of Music. We lived in Paris, but then later London, and I realized I just didn't have the nerves for that. It's really nerve wracking. I admire these pianists who can sit in front of four or 5,000 people and just come out with the Hammerklavier, Beethoven's Hammerklavier. It's like an hour long sonata, and they just play and as if nobody's there. So anyway, and I then got into wanted to do medicine. Then I stopped that. My teachers all knew that I was going to be writing because they all said you write well, so just do that. And I did that, and I got into radio. Yeah, classic. I used to be a classical announcer. My first four years or 4.5 years were classical announcing at WFCR FM, 88.5 FM, WFCR in Amherst, Massachusetts. You have that at the top of your
Yeah.
head. And from there, I moved back to Germany because I grew up in Europe. I was born in New York, grew up in Europe, went to the United States, did my university studies there, went back to Europe, lived in Germany for a long time, though I kept sort of moving around, and did a lot of. Originally, I wanted to do politics. I'm very interested in history and politics. I like those two subjects, but it's a difficult it's a difficult um, coterie to get into. They're sort of, you really have to be right where the journalists are, and I was living in. So I did technology and science and a little bit of politics. I reported on the first the first elections in Hungary after the wall fell in 1990.
Wow.
Very fun, actually. It was very, very fun to report on that. Especially talking to the old Communist Party. They were hoping they would get over 5%. They didn't. But but they were good about it. They had a good sense of humor, I must say, considering the ill sense of humor they had for the 40 years before. Anyway, and then at some point I realized that journalism, the way I was doing it, was dying. It was just going out of style. There were, the internet. Anybody could write. Apparently, anybody could do journalism. The citizen journalist. People were paying less and less, and for some crazy reason, I actually got a job I was by that time I was living in Geneva, and I got it sort of in Geneva and Germany, in both Munich and Geneva. I got a job as an editor of a business magazine in Basel as a freelance editor and writer. And they asked me, and this is where the funny thing happens. They asked me, could I do an interview with someone here, the boss of a very big brand? And I did that. And I was not, to be honest, that's why I'm not naming the brand. I was not really very impressed. I had to chase this person around the place. Finally caught up with him at Seoul International Airport and had to buy a telephone to record the interview. It was really, I just didn't have the feeling that this person
was it a watch brand or just
it's a watch brand, yes. And now I'll name the brand. And then the magazine said, oh, great, do another one before you come up to Basel, before you come live in Basel. So I said, okay, which one? They said, well, go up to see Blancpain, because they're not far from here, And I went there, and there was a woman there named Frau Reber. She was a Swiss German originally. And she showed me the brand, and she really knew how to talk about watches. And I remember seeing these people sort of listening to techno music and working on these. At the time, there was that one with all the complications, the 1 million franc watch. They were sort of working away at it. And then somebody said, this is an équation du temps marchand. This is the equation of time. And I said, well, what is that? They said, well, there's this hand here that shows the sun time as opposed to earth time. And I think that's the moment I fell in love with watches, because to be able to do that in a mechanical watch, you really have to know your stuff. The sun has a different time than the earth. I mean, we've tempered our time. And that's why sometimes you look at sundials and they don't really say what your watch says, because the sun is just different and it's real. And that really impressed me. So I wrote about Blancpain, and then I have to mention how I really got into it, because I then moved to Basel, and the next article I wrote was about Maximilien Busser. Max Busser with his MBNF. This was 2007. I figured I would have about a half-hour interview with him, and we sat in one of those hotels down by, and I think we spoke for 2 hours. And Max was just absolutely fabulous, articulate. He knew his stuff inside out. He had a strong opinion on aesthetics, on watchmaking, and it was a beautiful interview. It really was. I really appreciate it. To this day, he was just starting the brand. His new brand. I think it had been around for a year or something, but not really producing. He hadn't yet produced the first horological machine. And wow. Anyway, we had a great time. And from that time on, I started writing regularly about watches. That's the story how I got into watches. And I like writing about watches, especially watchmakers, by the way. Sometimes I can do without the PR people.
Yeah. I mean, it's I explained to clients and also fellow kind of industry people in the trade, that kind of thing, that there's so much to love about the watch industry and the market as a whole, and there's also so many things that need to be, I think, resolved and changed, and it's something I will come on to afterwards, actually, asking you where you think changes ought to be made and what you would like to see going forwards. But it's great you kind of showed showcase kind of how you kind of got into your passion for watches. Out of curiosity, what are you wearing today? I forgot to ask that.
Okay,
you put the Apple Watch on today.
No, I have this thing, I did like watches. I always would look at them and I look at the price, and I figured if I buy that watch, I'm gonna have to sell a hell of a lot of articles. So and I was living in Germany where the taxes were fairly high, but you got a lot for your taxes. I'll tell you a story, because this is one of the things. Why do we like watches? I mean, why do we have a passion for watches? Why do certain things attract us and other things don't? I mean, we could quote, Alain de Botton, who sort of basically said, well, if you have a messy room, and you can see mine is a little bit messy, you'll like clean things. And if you have a clean room, you'll like something that's a little bit more complicated. I see a little bit differently. German watchmaking is much cleaner than Swiss watchmaking. The Swiss like these very complicated things with lots of little dials and stuff. The French too, a little bit. The Germans, and I keep pointing out there, it's not really correct. It's back there. But where are they? They're northeast of us. you see them, and there's something very special. But there's another watchmaker that I really adore, and I'll tell you about this one. In 1989, I was in Berlin when the wall fell. That was just by accident. I
Wow.
was just 2 days later. It was quite by accident. I was actually in East Berlin because I was doing an article on Baroque, on the Baroque age of Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back. I used to go to the ITB, which is a tourist fair, and at the time, the Soviet soldiers. I knew East Germany, and the Soviet soldiers were leaving, and they were just departing. They had nobody was there. The commanders were out drunk somewhere, and they were putting little rugs on the floor near the Brandenburg gate, and they were selling things. And there was a soldier who I started looking at. He looked at me. He offered me a Kalashnikov. Honest to goodness, had weapons there and knives and all kinds of stuff. And then I said, "Look, I really I wouldn't know what to do with a gun. I'm not really a gun freak." But he had some watches there. And one of them, I bought 5 for
Okay.
25 marks, Deutschmarks. Okay. 5 watches, 3 pocket watches and 2 wristwatches. And the wristwatches didn't have a band, and I put them away in a box. One I gave to my then girlfriend, who promptly lost it. It was one of those pocket watches, you know. And I still have the other one here. And a few years ago, when I was doing Wristwatch Annual, I did an article on what do you call that? Water resistance, and on these screw-in crowns, because they're very special, okay? And I didn't have a photograph, a good photograph of one. So I found this box with my watches in it, and I put this watch on my desk, and I wound it up. It didn't have a band, and it worked perfectly. It just kept, and this is it. It's a Sturmansky original, wow, and it still works.
Wow.
I have it on time. That's the one I'm wearing. I wear it a lot. Wow. The other one that I love, that I made myself with Paul Gerber. It's part of a seminar. It's a very simple watch. It has a Unitas in it. You can't see it. There's a light on it. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guilloche dial?
Yeah. Guilloche. Well, that's a sort of, yeah, it's a kind of guilloche.
Kind of guilloche,
but
yeah.
the important thing was this, and this taught me something very important. I can really, really suggest anybody who really gets into watchmaking, if you have the money to do one of these watchmaking seminars, it teaches you something that is extraordinary. The most difficult part of the watches is the finishing, I find.
Okay.
And you really have to be patient. That's why watchmakers walk around like very kind of slowly, regularly. They have a certain way of walking.
like in the Caribbean, it was like that. That was like they make good watch people.
Yeah. A little anecdote about this. At one point, we'd finished sanding and rhodium plating the dial and everything. It was really not. I'm not the dial, the main plate in the back. Yep. It's an open plate. It's a 3/4 plate, and we had to screw this little thing in with our names on it. There were 2 other guys with me, and we were about to go to lunch. And I just told her. I said to Paul Gerber, I said, "Look, I'm going to do this quickly." He said, "Don't ever do something quickly in watchmaking." And I said, "No, it's okay. I'll do it." And damn it, the screwdriver slipped off the screw and scratched my main plate. Oh. I had to start over again afterwards. After lunch, I had to start over again. And he said, "You see, you don't do things quickly. You just do it patiently. You'd rather wait a little bit when you have time, do things." And I've heard this again. I've heard this over and over again. I just interviewed Antonio Prezioso. He's in the next book. I don't know if you know Prezioso.
I don't.
Family of watchmakers. Very, very complicated watches. He's a crazy guy.
Are they in the previous book or no?
It's in the next one. It's in the next one.
But their watches aren't. I know you're doing an article, but their watches aren't actually in this book, are they?
No, they're not. No, they're not. Okay. It's very difficult with him. He's one of those independents. Let me see. If I have Antoine is actually, I call him Antonio, but his name is Antoine. He's actually straight from Geneva. He was born in Geneva. His parents were Italian.
Got you.
Very, very fine. His daughter makes jewelry. She teaches here there's a university here for design. She teaches there. Wow. He works with his son. It's what is it called? The tourbillon des tourbillons. If you look it up, it's got 3 tourbillons and they turn. If you look it up online,
I have come across this watch, but I don't think I knew who made it.
it's insane. It's 3 tourbillons, and all he wanted to do was check if there was a resonance that happened. You know, if they all started ticking in the right direction, in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, you meet incredible people, and it's really good to meet the watchmakers. It's really great. They'll tell you everything you need to know about the watches, and those are the people who actually make the watches.
Amazing.
They're great.
So you actually touch on something there, because that's a brand I haven't come across. So how, I mean, you know, there's obviously the mainstay brands, Rolexes, Amigas, etc., that are going to be in the book inevitably. But how do you find, how do you find other brands as they come to you? Is there a mixture of how does it work in terms of collating all this information as well?
It's funny. How did I come in the coming book? I finally did an article on just that. Things that just come either by email or whatever. I just decided these watches need at least a showing, even if they're not successful, even if next year they all go belly up. But every now and then, I think it's important just to show what's out there. And there's such a range. There's a little brand called Blanc Carré, which means white square. Mm-hmm. I think that they produce in Neuchâtel. Is it Neuchâtel? I'm getting a little confused if it's Neuchâtel or La Chaux-de-Fonds. It's like op art. It's black, white squares, and it's just, I saw it in a window. You know, there's a place called La Maison de l'Horlogerie down there. We actually meet once a month, and a bunch of watch fans, members, you know, people who work in the watch business, all kinds. And it was in the window, and I looked at it. I said, "That's really impressive. Little square, everything is square on it." Mm-hmm. Sometimes I come across a brand quite by accident. Sometimes they contact me, and I look at them. I do try and feel the watches, give them a feel. Yeah, because you feel a lot when you've touched them. I do have a little problem with titanium. It's too light. Sometimes I have a feeling I have plastic in my hand, but that's just me.
Like an Amiga Moonswatch.
Yeah. There's also a guy, I put him in the book finally because by strange coincidence, his name is Yvon Monet, and he does a pentagonal watch. And again, it's the thing is you see it and you say, "Oh yeah, it's a pentagonal watch." The amount of work that goes into it. He spent ages figuring out how to make the perfect pentagon. The width of the dial, the width of the bezel, the color of the dial, the shape of the hands. What does it look like on the back? What is your crown supposed to? Where are you going to put a crown in a pentagonal watch? It's got to be a little bit off center, because where you'd put it otherwise, there's a corner. Yeah. You know, and the amount of work that goes into this. People say, some of my friends who don't know watches, they say, "Oh, what is that watch? Why is it so expensive? Why is it worth, I don't know, $6,000?" Yeah. Because people spent years doing it. Yeah. You know,
I always recount the story of when I was, I think, coming up to 21 years old. So I'm almost 30. So this is 9 years ago or so now. And I'm not saying Patek Philippe weren't a big brand. They absolutely were. But they weren't in the zeitgeist by any shape like they are now. Like, you didn't have rappers back then talking about them. You didn't have, it wasn't in popular culture. You know, people that knew watches knew Patek, but like, you know, the average person on the street wouldn't have heard of it. Whereas nowadays, it's very, very much more in the zeitgeist. I think you'd probably agree. The reason I mention this is because I went into Cartier to look at a watch that I was, you know, looking for my 21st. And then I walk, because I'm Bond Street in London, and I walk by and I see the Patek Salon, as they call it, there, and where you are as well, of course. And there's a queue 3 deep to get in this store. And I've heard of Patek, and I've seen the adverts of, you know, you never own a watch, you really look after the next generation. You know, I love that tagline. I'm sure it's kind of cheesy, but I think it's great. And I'm like, I'm curious now, like, what's everyone queuing up for here? So I wait in line, and, you know, of course, most of the people there from memory were from kind of Middle Eastern countries, Asian, Far East, that kind of thing. And I'm sat there with what turned out later to know at the time, the salon director, right? And I'm this 20-year-old kid, and he's talking me through, and this is the time it was. You could buy an Aquanaut, a Nautilus, anything at list, no problem. They're all there. You could just get them. You could buy 5 of them if you wanted. It was no problem. So, and he's talking me through an Aquanaut. I remember specifically, I'm not kidding, for 2 hours. The guy's talking about everything. And the reason I mentioned it, because you've reminded me, whenever I explain to people why certain watches are certain values, some of them are just vastly overpriced because of marketing and different things, of course, and PR. And we came to that before from the recording about how much PR is a part of the business, for good or for bad. But he was explaining that each baton of this watch is polished to the nth degree. It takes X number of decades to understand how to do it properly. It takes number of days to do each. And you sat there, you're like, wow, like someone's spent, or people, a whole team of people spent so much time. You can't even fathom it. You're like, this is incredible. And this is the thing that was great. I said, I feel awful because I think it was £16,000 at the time, something like that. And I said to myself, I feel awful because I'm not like in the world of being able to buy this at this point in time. And he goes, sir, he says, that is not the point. He says, I've planted a seed and one day you will own a Patek. And I thought that is the best sales. I've never seen anything like it since. And the Cartier experience, which obviously is far more quote unquote mass market, it isn't to most people, but it is in the watch world, of course. The guy was so aloof. He was like, what are you doing in here? I was dressed quite casually and whatever else. And I thought, well, that's just, case in point, why one brand's that point where it's at and one isn't, to a degree.
Yeah. This is one of the things I think that there used to be Basel World, and then there was the SIHH in January, Yep.
I love that.
I think that the people at the SIHH got a great idea. And that was to add this Carré des Horlogers. Suddenly, you were outside of Richemont and you had a bunch of independent watchmakers. And that little square, that's what it's called, was full of journalists. Full. Everybody was going there. Why? Because I remember I was sitting at the MBNF presentation, and they have a great guy, Charis. He does a wonderful presentation. He's always very cool in jeans and stuff, and very, very,
Apple-like.
Yeah, he just exactly. It's very Apple-like. He's not trying to sell you the watches. He's telling you what they're about, and he lets the journalists do the writing. This is also what I tell a lot of people: let the journalists do their work.
Yeah.
Let them be critical. We know what we're doing just about. And I remember there were in front of me there was two Belgian journalists, and they had never even heard of NBNF. And they had no idea what these phenomenal watches were. I mean, they can't call them watches. They are what they are. It's kinetic art.
Yep.
And it was really amazing. I think they were presenting that funny octopus, that thing that looks like a jellyfish.
Yep.
Anyway, a medusa. But it was, I have a hole in my head. I can't quite remember. But these are the things that are turning also the watchmaking industry on its head. I mean, these small independent brands are the ones dragging the big brands, because the big brands are brand constrained. They can't go out of their way too much.
Yep.
They can't do something terribly new because people will drop them. People expect one thing.
Stability, tradition.
They've got freedom, and I want to mention one brand because very few people know. Unfortunately, I don't have it right here. Otherwise, I'd show it to you. There's a small brand in Israel, a fellow named Itai Noy.
Yeah,
and he was one of the first brands, because he's not a watchmaker, he's an industrial designer, but he's literally, he's in there. I always put him in there. Yeah, Itai Noy. He always has these are real conversation pieces.
Funny because I remember, I have a really photographed memory of things if it means something. I mean, I'm Jewish as well, so that's obviously another reason why. But I remember the name, and I knew it was in this book. How mad's that? It's really, but here's again. If people are watching, can see it. People that cannot, but this is the brand here.
Yeah, these are fabulous. I mean, they're crazy watches. They're this little. I mean, he has these ideas that are just, and looking at his watches and talking with him, I always used to go see him at Baselworld. You realize that the watch, and I've written this a few times, so I'm just repeating myself. The watch actually is like all beautiful objects, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Any object that you really like, you engage in a kind of dialogue with it. It's on your wrist, it's hanging around your neck, or it's in your room, and it somehow it lets you dream a little bit and lets you think or envision stuff. I think that's why we surround ourselves with objects we like that are beautiful. And watches have the advantage of being not only beautiful but well made, usually.
Yeah, well made, and also, I mean, the one I'm wearing here is a 16234 Rolex, date 36 from 1996 T serial. Again with that rose kind of dial. It depends who you ask, but rose is probably the best, I think, description of it. Roman numerals, and I was out today having a coffee, doing some work in a coffee store, and like the feeling of wearing this. I love my Apple Watch, and like I'll be the first to tell people it's a great watch. It's beautifully made. It's really clever. It does lots of things, and I like it as well. It opens on my MacBook like straight away. It's amazing. Like that's amazing technology. My Rolex can't do that, thankfully. But there's time and a place, but when I'm wearing this Rolex, like there's something about it. And then it's not just being a watch connoisseur, enthusiast, expert, whatever. Like you find this with lots of other people as well that wears watch. Like there's a sensation you get, not just Rolex. It could be lots of different brands. I've got watches that are £10. In fact, I've got right here, which is quite. Have you seen this? Have you seen this one? The Swatch watch, the Her Majesty.
No.
So this is really
No,
cool.
I haven't.
So this was made for the Queen's Jubilee.
Absolutely,
It has 70 gold dots around the dial there, as you can see for the Jubilee.
Yeah.
But it has the corgi and the queen on it. But what I love is they've used the date wheel function, and it changes the color of the queen's outfit.
Ah, wonderful.
So
that's clever.
Let me see if I
really
can.
Clever.
Let me see if I can actually show you this. Yeah. So I saw it and I was like, my grandma doesn't know, but I bought my grandma one as well because I thought she'd like it. I've just ripped the case, of course, like an idiot. Let me see if I can do this. But yeah, like my point I'm trying to make is that it's not. I mean, I would never wear this personally. It's not for that, but like it's just interesting, and like it has something unusual, and like obviously the fact that the Queen's no longer here also is quite poignant, but. Even the moon swatches, which a lot of people will go, oh, what is it? It's like it gets people excited about watches. It brings affordability to people who couldn't necessarily afford a Speedmaster, and those sort of people eventually go, you know what? I'd love to work up to get a Speedmaster. It's like an entry level thing. And a friend of mine asked me about the watch industry. He said, well, what has an Apple Watch just killed off all the watches? And I'm like, quite the opposite. I said they're the biggest manufacturer bar none of watches, but like people then all suddenly going, oh, I like a watch on my wrist, but I don't know wear this with a suit. It doesn't quite work for me, or whatever, or something else. And all of a sudden they've brought in decided to go for something else or look for something else.
Sorry, but everybody has. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people have an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
And that's it. And the rest is a talking piece. I mean, if you go out and even that is a talking piece. It's a fun piece. It's fun. That's the important part of it. And Swatch does good stuff. I mean, they make good material. It's of course, those of us who are sort of snobbish about mechanical watches.
Yeah, I'm trying to I'm fiddling around with it to try and see. Okay, I don't know if I can show it, but like it's hard to see.
All right, yeah, she was wearing green before.
Can you see?
That's very clever.
It's just a clever little.
Yeah.
Like someone's cleverly thought about that. Someone's thought Queen's Jubilee. What can we do a bit differently? And the watch I think was 85 English pounds. And yeah. I bought a few of them, and they're just a bit of fun.
No, the Swatch people are great. It's funny because a lot of people.
The packaging is clever.
The packaging is great. Yeah,
it's lovely.
I mean, it's so classic, and it'll be in every single souvenir shop.
I'm sure.
But what's really interesting about Swatch is that they cover the whole. They've got so many other brands, you know. I mean, Harry Winston is Swatch,
Yep.
Blancpain is Swatch,
Reggae.
Breguet is Swatch,
Yep.
Jacques Drogue is Swatch, Omega is
Amiga.
Swatch.
Yeah. Tissot.
I mean, yeah, Tissot is Swatch. I
Yeah.
mean, my
So,
book is
so,
full of them. Rado is Swatch.
so another great example is Tissot PRX, the one
Yeah,
that came out last year. Like that is a great watch. Like
yeah,
I don't care what anybody says. Like forget the brand name for a second. Like put that on your wrist, with the integrated bracelet. Like tell me that's not a beautifully made watch. Like it's just beautiful. You know, the waffle dial, the finishing, like 80-hour power reserve for, I mean, it's actually gone up in price, I believe, by 9% in the UK, but it was 565 for the 80-hour
yeah.
power reserve model. The day only, the chrono was like, I think 15 or 12.50. In my opinion, the pricing is totally wrong. I think it's too much for the chrono and like too little for the day only. I think they've kind of messed it up a bit. That's my opinion. But I think it's a great watch.
Yeah. The power reserves, by the way, you know, they have a meaning now. It's the famous weekend watch. You want to have at least 72 hours power reserve.
Okay.
There's that, and it's one of the problems with it's somewhere in that article that I wrote on women's watches, which I don't believe exists, by the way. That's why I wrote that article. I think
Okay.
so. I've seen so many women wear men's watches because women choose a watch for themselves. They don't choose a watch whether it's been made for them. It's sort of a strange thing. There are a lot of interesting discussions about that going on. But
Whether watches should be labeled ladies or gents, basically.
yeah, that's right. I mean, they still
It
have
shouldn't,
them.
it shouldn't be. It's just like if you like it, you like it. I mean, of course,
Exactly.
certain watches like a Patek 24 is clearly like aimed at women. Like it clearly is.
Yeah.
Like if a guy wants to wear it, like so be it. Like this watch, most people could argue is a ladies' watch, smaller
It's a,
size, dial color preference, whatever. But it didn't, particularly in today's day and age, but even years ago, people wear what they think's right. Like if it fits your
yeah.
wrist, I have particularly small wrists, so like bigger watches, I can get away with them, but sometimes I'm more comfortable to wear a 36, which is great because it means all vintage watches are available to me. Whereas a lot of people with bigger wrists, like all of a sudden, like an IWC Pilot from like 1970 or 80 looks wrong on their wrist.
Yeah.
Whereas to me,
Yeah.
it's great. Yeah, I'll take them. Don't worry, they're way underpriced.
And it's very cultural as well because in Asia they don't really look at that. They look at the aesthetics of the watch. That's very important. And it's a fundamental part of Asian philosophy, the look of the watch. So they don't mind. I mean, it's not that, if it has diamonds on it, it's not going to be female. It's going to be a watch with diamonds. If it's well made, it's well made, period. It's interesting because I have other I work in other departments as well, not only watchmaking, but I do some work for I did some work for a pharmaceutical company, and it was very interesting because in 2005, I think, or six, I can't remember, they received the permission to actually fill and finish syringes for the Japanese market. The Japanese market had opened up to foreign companies. This is a German company, and they had to build, I think, 2 lines, brand new lines, because the Japanese inspectors will not accept the slightest speck of dust or the slightest scratch on the syringe. In Europe, we say the quality of the stuff inside has got to be, it's got to all work, but if there's a little bit of dust, who cares? Just wipe it off. But not in Japan. And it was very interesting because it taught me a lot about this phenomenal Japanese watchmaking. I mean, if you look in the book, there I put in Minase. That's a tiny little brand, and they do just wonderful watches. They're quite, should I say, masculine, but they're very beautiful. They're just a small brand here. I met the people who actually distribute them here. Yeah, Minase, that's right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I mean, you can like them or not like them, but they're beautifully made. They're beautifully made. And Seiko, beautifully made watches.
Really, really nice. I kind of like cow horn. The word lugs are very nice on this
Yeah,
Divido Arushi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
yeah. The Urushi is a particular style of it's a kind of it's not enamel exactly. It uses egg white and all kinds of
Wow.
things. They're
Is
really crazy. I
you
love
can
these
just
things.
go. I have got some questions. I don't know how you are for
Yeah.
time. I'm fine, but I don't want to kind of
No,
overrule.
no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
So I want to go like on some things that I want to ask you about Wristwatch Annual. So, did you originally come up with it, or did you come along? When did it start? Like when and how did Wristwatch Annual start? I'm curious.
Okay, I don't know the beginnings of Wristwatch Annual. I know how I Wristwatch Annual is basically a bit of a franchise as far as I understand it. I'm not it's look, it's 352 pages. I do it for like 4 months out of the year and then dead tired after that. But it really is a lot of work. I'll tell you how I got it. Remember, I started in 2007. In 2009, I was invited to a place in, I was invited to Monaco, actually, the classic week for 3 days. It was a classic weekend, actually, 3 days. And there I met the person who used to do Wristwatch Annual, who is a fabulous watch journalist, Elizabeth Durr. You probably know her.
Yep.
She is, what she knows is, I mean, it's staggering. And she just finished, I think, publishing a book called 12 Faces of Time. And we were talking and she said, she said, you might be you might be just what I need. She'd been doing it for God knows how many years before, and she wanted to sort of free up her summers because it was done in summer.
Okay.
Because she had kids. I also had a kid. At the time my daughter was 3. No, she was 5, what I'm talking about. And so she said, look, do you want to do this book? And I said, sure. And I think I went up to see her afterwards because she lived just north of me. I was living in Germany, but right next to Basel. And she was a bit further. I think she was in Karlsruhe. And I said, well, doing books is what I actually like doing. I've done a lot of tourist guides before, tour guides.
I
For
noticed that.
Nellis Verlag, I did one for opera guides. I did a few things for opera guides and stuff like that. I like doing it. It's nice writing and it's fun and it's kind of stuff you get into. And so I started. I started in 2010. I did the first one. So by that time, I think it was on she'd been doing it, I think, for 12 or 14 years. And she still does the independents for me. That I've given to her. She loves writing about the independent watchmakers, and she knows them all. And she's very good. So that's the history. Now, the book, if you look at it, it's written with Martin Radkai at the bottom,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
Peter Braun. Peter Braun is a phenomenal knowledge bank about watches. He's been doing it for decades and decades, and he's in Germany, and he basically does. They send us his texts, and what I take from him are the brands that I like or that I don't really want to deal with. I'll be honest with you. That is Rolex, Patek, and all these. They're very big. It's very difficult to do a big selection like that. He has a team of people that help him, and he does always a good selection. And I add mine. At the beginning, when I got the book, I started adding like 10, and then I would get yelled at it was published in Germany at the time. Well, it wasn't published in Germany. It was sort of like the Germans would sort of say, no, you're not allowed to do this. And I'd say, well, I'm allowed to put 10 more or 10 new ones every year and whatever. Anyway, I started adding more and more brands that I thought were important. Also, because the book appears in America, is published in America, US brands. So you have now brands like RGM, Towson, which is on the front cover. The Detroit Watch Company, they do some good work, not expensive watches. Vortic, a very interesting brand. If you look at it, Vortic, it's run by a guy, I only know him as RT. That's all. I think he refused to give his first name and second name. He's just called RT. It's very good marketing, by the way. He discovered, somebody told him, they said, old wristwatches, these old Hamiltons, Elgins, and so on and so forth, they're taking away the cases and they're throwing away the movements. And he said, that's what a shame. Let's make watches out of the old movements with some of the old dials.
What was the brand called again?
Vortic, Vortic.
Yep.
And he started 3D printing watches. The first one I saw had a little crack in it, and it was like 3D printed titanium with an old Hamilton dial or an Elgin dial in it, or one of these Lancaster dials in it, whatever, not Lancaster, what is the other one called? They're famous.
Waltham.
Yeah, Waltham, exactly.
Mhm.
And he said all he had to do was create a how do you call it again, a thing for the winder, for
Stem.
the winding crown, a stem, yeah, the stem and this little sort of tube.
Hmm.
That's all. And so he had a Swiss watchmaker. He invited him over to Colorado where they bought a farm, and then they were making these watches. And the funny thing about this story is that he got sued by Hamilton because he had Hamilton on his watches.
Yeah.
And Hamilton, it's why I have a little bit of a gripe with Swatch. It's what they earn what 30, they have a turnover of like $35 billion a year, and they're going after this guy. Come on, I mean, of course it's got Hamilton on the dial. These are old dials. And after 5 years, and he almost went broke and whatever, he won the case. It was the Southern District Court of New York City, the same one that is sort of on Trump's tail, that gave him the approval. He could do it. It's sort of like upcycling old watches, which is a great idea.
This is it here again. People that are watching it.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, wonderful clear dials. These are
Really
basically
cool.
pocket watches. Yeah. Very simple,
I
very
would
nice.
see. I mean, I haven't actually. I'm not had a chance properly. I mean, looking now, I've got my bookmark. I've only got to A. I'm not even finished A. This is page 66. I mean,
Then you
this
see
is Artea, if I pronounce that correct, or Artia.
Artia. Oh God, Artia.
Wow. I mean, these are just. I don't even know how. It's just different. It's just completely different. What just not?
Different.
There we go.
And the man has ideas. I had lunch with him not long ago, and the man has ideas that you wouldn't believe it. His wife is an artist. She's the one who does a lot of the pigment work on the dials. Each dial is unique.
Incredible.
And he did this wonderful thing with the bezels. He would have the bezels zapped with a Tesla machine, and he's very good at marketing, by the way. He used to be with Romain Gérôme, and they somehow stopped liking him for some reason. But he's the one who made watches with a case out of coprolite, which is actually dinosaur, pardon the French, dinosaur shit that has been fossilized. It's
Copperlight.
coprolite. Yeah, it's he's the one who made this. I can't even pronounce it. That this watch with the airplane things in honor of the when the do you remember when the volcanoes in Iceland blew? They started erupting and then they stopped all of the
Right.
the airplanes. He did a watch for that, and you can see the lava sort of going through it. It's really, I mean, the man has great ideas, and no hesitation on stepping on people's feet. I mean, he's got this whole image where, but he lives it. He lives it with the skulls and bikers and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
I always love talking to him. He's very honest. He's very straightforward.
Do you find across, I mean, you deal with, just going back, so you said this Peter Braun fella, he's got like is he a watch journalist as well? Is that?
Oh yeah. That's his thing.
And
I write about other things if I can. I write about other things.
Right. So you take all the like independent smaller brands, and he does the Rolex, Tudor, Patek, Omega, that sort of thing.
Yeah, basically that's it. And I have Artia, Azimut, which is
you're most the book nowadays, though. Was that not the case before?
Well, no. At the beginning, it was really I would take. I don't know. I should look at the first articles that I did. I would sort of do things on watches, and I slowly started realizing that the book should maybe be for people who are starting to collect, for collectors, so that they can learn about more than, for example, I would do a technical thing. There's a technical thing. I would do things like chronographs. Then the next year I did water resistance.
Enamel was in this last one, if I'm not mistaken.
Enamel was in the last one. 2 years ago, I did something on the tourbillon as a design element.
I do actually read it,
Yeah, great. The watch, the one on watches, on women's watches, was really tough to write because I interviewed psychologists and sociologists, and I read tons of books articles on fashion, because I wanted to express what is this thing with women's watches? I don't know. I sort of got into it, and then I had this 5,000 word article on my table, and I had to cut it down because you just can't do that anymore. People just don't read that much.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping it's interesting. I did one on clocks 2 years ago, 3 years ago, table clocks, because they have a different quality. There's something different in a table clock, and I figured maybe next year I'll do one on big grandfather clocks. The grandfather clock, it sort of rhythms your time, the time of the family. It stands there and it goes tick, 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 and it's like everybody. The table clock is sort of very personal. I think I call it God's henchman or something like that, because they're ticking away your time and you really see it. It's anyway. It's sort of maybe cheap, but philosophizing about time. It's just interesting.
We have
It's
actually
fun.
in the story a JLC Atmos. That's a super interesting clock.
Phenomenal.
Like people just don't understand what that is. Like I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really understand it either, because I always say to them, I'm not the foremost expert on calibers, on movement. Like, I'm not mechanically minded. It's just not the way my mind functions. I'm very aesthetics. I'm very I'm driven in other capacities. But like that is just something else.
It's amazing. I mean, it just keeps going. It's like the permanent movement machine. It just sort of, because the atmosphere is always changing.
It's amazing they've never figured out, unless I'm wrong, like how to put that into a watch. Like, is it just not possible because of the amount of components required, etc.?
Maybe you shouldn't say that in public and make your next watch.
Yeah, just tell them, hey, I came up with this thing. I've patented it. You're gonna have to pay me a big 7 figure sum. It must be you must need a large aperture and components to make it. Like, the watch has to be like 75 mil for it to work.
It needs, I think it needs a certain amount of size. But about table clocks, it's interesting. I have here, I love it. I don't ever wind it. What I love about this watch is the clock, is where I got it. I'm going to show it to you.
So what's on the left and the right?
It's well, on the right, on the one side you have a barometer.
Yep.
And in the middle you have a thermometer, and here you have the clock. And in the back you have all the winding stuff. It's a very heavy clock. It's bronze. And what I love about it is, of course, the story. Every watch should have a story. I mean, if you really love it. This belonged to my grandfather in Budapest.
Amazing.
And I was able to get it. We don't have time to tell you the whole story, but I actually swiped it from his third wife's. When I first went to Budapest, I went with my father. It was a dream of mine because my father was born in Budapest. And while we were driving there, she died. His stepmother died.
Wow.
And a year later, there's a Marton Radkai club in Budapest. I have to say that. That's my grandfather. He was an actor.
Wow.
And a year later, I went to the club and I said, what's happened to that apartment? Because I wanted the papers of my grandfather. I didn't think there was any much value in that back in the communist days. And she said, "Oh, what a miracle!" The head of the club said, "What a miracle! Tomorrow they're unsealing the apartment, and you can take whatever you want, but nothing of value." And I went there with one of the women from the club, and she brought some suitcases out, and she started filling things in there really quickly. And this is what she did. She took this for me. She said, "I put a few things in there for you." And what I love about it, there's a history to this, because I looked up the name Kleinberger. It's written there. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was Jewish. My father was Jewish.
Okay.
He was from a Jewish family. And of course, they went through the war. Not my father. My father was in America already, but my grandfather did. Mm. And I found them in the Jewish Museum, the Holocaust Museum in the United States. And I've been searching for this family. It was an old Jewish family, that was making watches, clocks and watches. And this is a handmade clock.
Wow.
From Budapest. And so there's a whole history behind there. You look at it and there's a name on it, and you sort of feel like putting little stones on the top. It's like it's like a grave almost. Mm. It's time. And I love it for that. So I never wind it. I've never fixed it, but it does work. It does work. Beautiful piece with nice regulators up here. If it goes too fast, you can move it yourself. You can change the amplitude. It's really great. So anyway, everything clocks have stories, and
I couldn't agree more.
yeah,
What is it? A couple of questions I've got here. So
yeah,
in terms of, so these are kind of more broad stroke watch based questions that I'm just interested to hear your take
yeah.
from your angle. So obviously the last 12, 24 months, the bubble was just bonkers on the big hype pieces of Rolex, Patek, and AP, those sort of pieces, RMs as well. What was your view on that? Why do you think that happened? If you were to guess, or to what you might know better than I do.
Well, I think there are several reasons. I actually address this in the Dear Reader in this coming book.
Okay.
It's not only the big brands. Some of them had some real problems. I mean, I heard one big brand that could hardly sell a watch during the confinement. What happened was, what is amazing, is that the smaller independent brands have been overrun by buyers as well. And I think the consensus that I'm hearing, and I think it's true, people had time suddenly, and they couldn't go out, so they would be floating around the internet, and at some point they would come across other watches, or they would come across watches. They had time. Buying a watch, it takes time. You're going to look at this, and then you're going to see the other one, and you see the next one, and then you're going to weigh them, and you know how it is when you surf the web. You just time flies, literally.
That's one of the joys that I love about some of the trading roles that I do in terms of like sourcing for people. Like I love like trying to find the 166.024 with the perfect big triangle and the original loom or whatever. As much as I love finding a modern piece, I just that hunter gatherer instinct of human beings is just so interesting. That's one of the things I love as well, for sure.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine just wrote to me that she's looking for an Omega. So if I knew any places where you can get one, I don't know, discount or whatever. So I'm going to look that up a little bit once I get this book done.
Yep.
Yeah, there is that, and I think also, as somebody once said, people have money now. That's why there's inflation. There's money, but there's nothing to buy. I mean, not nothing to buy, but there's just not enough because the supply chain was interrupted. So we have inflation. I mean, of course, everybody in the United States, it's the Democrats, it's the Republicans. It's just because there's not enough wares. The supply chains have been interrupted, so prices go up because supply and demand. And I think a lot of people had money and they suddenly said, yeah, let's buy this. And then you can also think of there's actually a growing secondhand market, used watches market, very, very strong.
Yep.
And people are thinking of investing in watches. I mean, you are buying a valuable object, and the question is it going to keep its value or not? And that's the big issue with watches. Okay, it's a little bit like buying a car.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I get asked an awful lot about, I'm looking for my first watch. Between 5 and 10,000 tends to be the sort of number people come up with. I want to make sure I don't lose on it. What's the best watch for investment? And naturally, like people just like then go to a non-date sub like that. That's pretty much kind of where people lie, and then everyone's just got one of those. And this is a beautifully made watch, lovely watch, no question. But there's so much else, but I understand people's hesitancy to go for a more niche brand or something else or whatever, because the attractiveness, or one of the attractive points of this luxury quote unquote sector, is that things can be passed on and can appreciate, and you can cash out with them at a certain time if you need money for a house deposit or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I do understand that. So
that's absolutely understandable. What sometimes I wonder whether buying, I don't want to name the brand because you become critical of a certain brand, but some brands sometimes they come out with watches and then you hear that they've been sold out, and you sort of say, how did that watch get sold out? They got sold out to millionaires who don't know what they're buying. They basically could have bought a Swatch and they would have just as good a watch. I know that they are attracted by certain things. I won't tell you which brand I'm thinking, right?
Mhm.
But a lot of the journalists that are colleagues, they were amazed at what certain brands come up with. And you realize that they're coming up with stuff because there's a market for it.
Yep.
You know, there's a market. So they're going to sell it out and then they're going to make a huge amount of money. And the only consolation I find from that kind of marketing is that they probably are going to use that money to put it into some serious watchmaking. They just don't need a,
That's a nice way of looking at it.
yeah, they need the sort of the basics, just like, you know, we all need a basic income of sorts to survive, you know.
Yeah,
That's,
no, I understand that. What's
yeah.
your view then on Rolex entering? So most people will know that are into watches, but some that aren't, that watch this listeners may not know. But Rolex end of last year decided that they would finally enter, officially anyway, the certified pre-owned market. They call it the CPO scheme, where they'll be, it sounds like, buying in watches over the counter in their authorized stockists and then reselling them again, getting involved in what's mostly known as the grey market, officially. What's your view on this? And do you think other brands are going to follow suit? I know some already do, or what do you think is going to happen with that?
I suspect that brands will follow. I mean, a certain number definitely will. What, you know, what Rolex, when Rolex breathes or sneezes, we all get a cold. I mean, basically, it's sort of like that. You can almost say that. Speaking of the gray market, interesting, the gray market, because I knew a guy here who sold watches on the gray market quite officially. I met him once. I did want to write an article on him. That was years ago. I think I'll give him a call again. And I asked him, I said, well, where do you get this stuff? He said, oh, from the brands. So, yeah. But I think that's fine. I think when Rolex sort of sets the course, then others will follow at some point. And I'm not really, to be really honest with you, I'm not going to say I'm not a fan of Rolex. I kind of leave them. One of these days, I'm going to go visit their factory. I'm going to go and learn all about Rolex.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strange thing to say for somebody who does Wristwatch Annual, but these big brands, I visited the factory at the Patek Philippe factory and it's wonderful to learn about how they make their watches.
Mm-hmm.
Rolex is still, you know, ahead of me. I always see their building here in Geneva. I go swimming a lot. That's when in the swimming pool right opposite. They actually built a bridge in Geneva. I don't know if you know that.
No.
They financed a bridge in Geneva. Yeah, it's a kind of nice bridge. It looks a little bit like a skeletonized movement, and it's called the Wilsdorf Bridge, Pont Wilsdorf. Yeah, and yeah, it what's happening in the market,
Wow,
of course,
that is really cool.
isn't it? And it changes colors, by the way. It has lights on it that change colors.
Wow. I've been to Geneva a lot of times and I've never seen this. Where is it?
It's on the second river of Geneva. If you know, Geneva has two rivers. It has the Arve, which comes down from the Mont Blanc, and then it has the Rhône, which comes out of the lake. And
Wow.
they meet at one point called the Jonction, the juncture,
Mm-hmm.
and it's up on the Arve. And the Arve, there's a funny story about that bridge. It was barely open, and we had a flood. It was on May. Well, it wasn't flooding. The river got very high
Mm-hmm.
on May 1st or 3rd, 2015, and they had to close that bridge because apparently the pillars holding it were not built quite wide enough. So I guess they shored it up in the meantime. But yeah, great bridge.
Very
And
cool.
yeah, and a little bit further up there, two bridges up, there's the oldest bridge in Geneva that was built by, if I remember correctly, the French. And it's the only bridge that was not closed during when the river rose that high. 1799, French engineering.
Wow.
Solid stuff.
Yeah, they knew they somehow knew what they were doing in those days. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, they do great bridges. The French have some terrific engineering. Very creative. Um, I remember when the Pont de Tancarville opened up, which was in Normandy. I'll never forget that. It was it was great we went out to Normandy, we crossed that bridge. It was a phenomenal bridge. Today, nobody cares, but it was just when I was a kid. Yeah, but back to the watches. Rolex is just amazing. It is just an amazing. They do amazing marketing.
As the brand you're referring to now, yeah?
Yeah, the brand. I mean, the how they can keep up. They're constantly selling. I mean, look, you can run along. Somebody once told me this. You could run along a street and wear, I don't know, a great Kudoki or even a Jaeger or one of these other brands or a Moza, and nobody would care. You wear a Rolex, they'll cut your arm off for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this is the power of marketing, and there's something in those watches. I have friends who buy Rolexes, you know, and they'll wait. Now they have to wait for, I don't know, years to get a Rolex or something. So naturally, the used market is very attractive.
Yep.
You know,
Very interesting. No, it is I mean, look, there's the caliber of events that they sponsor, be it Wimbledon, be it the Open Golf, be it the Masters, and all these different things. Like they're experts. They're just they're the number one marketed brand in the world. I mean, Apple are definitely there, as well, probably there or thereabouts. But I think if you to ask anyone instantly name a watch brand, probably 99,999 out of 100,000 people would say Rolex, and the other one would be me or you saying something else.
That's right. That's right. Rolex would
Like
be
it's Hanoi.
it's
Ridiculous.
phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And they don't really make, I don't want to say this in a judgmental way. They don't really make very creative watches. They always stick to their brand, you know.
Yep.
And they stick to their Jubilee and their Oyster and all these words.
Yep.
And they just do good work. That's sort of their thing, is that they just keep doing pretty much.
It's just fun. It's fundamentally, it works, and they have no interest in following trends or just simple, keep it going, keep it. And that's what makes it quite interesting, but also challenging sometimes, because to keep up with the changes, they're so minute. The caliber changes are so minute, and like the models look so identical, but one's again got that fluted white gold, one's a stainless steel engine turn, and it sometimes and it becomes challenging with Rolex. It does.
It really is. It really is. You have the feeling, when I do Wristwatch Annual, you have the feeling I'm doing the same watch over and over again, but it's not. You know, they're two change watches.
It's a 126-334, not 116-334. It's something.
Yeah, but you know, there's one thing you said that's interesting. They are the trend. It's not that they have made a trend, because there's so many imitators, many. I mean, how many times do you see sort of a diver's watch? Just you sort of say, wait a minute, is this a Rolex or not? You know, from far away, you could be led to believe this is a Rolex.
And I would suggest that's probably what they were going for.
Exactly. So it's a sort of down market Rolexes that are being made, but it's a terrific brand and a wonderful study for marketing and how to present yourself, what you can do with a brand.
Yep. You take an object, and my old business teacher always says something like this, that effectively, this is the same with what you do, so what anyone does. When anyone is offering services, you got to add value, and that's what that marketing does. It adds significant value to an object that otherwise intrinsically is worth nowhere near that. And most people are aware of that. Some people aren't, but most people are aware of that. It has that brand cachet, and that marketing and everything about it like creates that emotional connection with, I've got a Rolex, I've made it, I've done something in my life, I've achieved something, it has that with it.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely. You've married, you've had kids, you've built a house, you've planted a tree, as a friend of mine said, and then you bought a Rolex.
Or as a lot of people nowadays, they buy the Rolex first on finance and then they struggle with everything else, but that's a whole different story. I've got two last questions. I'll keep things quite succinct, just because otherwise we could go on forever, which we will do at some point, I'm sure. So twofold. Let's go with this one first. So you talked about journalism before, that it's changed massively from when you first got involved with it. This is a broader journalism question, not just watch journalism. Now, I'm sure you've come across and maybe played with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, or you're certainly aware of what is coming and
Yeah.
the potential of it could be. What do you see as, where was journalism? Where is it now? And where could it go with this kind of innovation, do you think?
It's funny because I teach in schools here. You know, I teach German and English and French in local high schools here. And just this morning, I was talking with two teachers who were saying, well, you know, basically the gold standard is still going to be what you have in your head and what you can say or do or write. And I think they were quite pessimistic about this. One even said, I'm almost praying for an atom bomb to just terminate the internet. But he's a cynic. He's a very dark thinker. He's an excellent musician, but a dark thinker.
Mhm.
I'm always amazed. I'm old fashioned, and I have a collection of fountain pens. I still write with a fountain pen, and I
Yeah.
love it. I love the feeling of paper. I love paper. Um, I think the one thing that makes for good journalism, I hate to say this, is an opinion. And I'm not sure that a machine can make an opinion. I mean, it really will need some sort of sense of what you're seeing. So the writing, our human input, is going to still be important. And I might be completely wrong. And in 10 years' time, people will see, look at that idiot said. That's okay. Fine.
Mark these words, yeah.
Mark my words, it was wrong. I journalism changed. I mean, when I started, you would write query letters to people and you would get answers because the editors were getting maybe 10 queries a day or 15, and big magazines or big newspapers are getting more. And they would answer. They would say, yes, we need this. No, we don't need that. So you had an investment in that. I used to work for a nice magazine called World of Interiors, a very well-known British magazine, or Vogue magazine, actually. And the woman, the Min Hogg was her name. She was a terrific editor, and she would write me these little messages saying, "Here, I got the story. I have no idea what it's about, or basically, this maybe you can do something with this." And it was about all kinds of things. She was very good. She knew exactly, she had a good eye for that. What is a good story? And then it changed. I saw it coming, and slowly, the prices went down. So you're not paying for journalism anymore, and it's a job. I mean, the journalism is a handwerk. It's a craft in some ways. You're using your knowledge, your experience, to write and to expose certain things. Now, for business writing, I think it's fine if a machine does it. Apparently, there already are machines writing business articles when it's very straightforward. Just facts. Just give me the facts. But in our business, yeah, there are people who write just the facts, but everyone has an opinion, even in the words you choose. You have a slight opinion. When I worked for Business Guide, I remember we used to have the car industry. They would drop by and say, "Can you write an article on us? We'll buy ads in your magazine." Of course, we needed the money.
Mm-hmm.
We did that. And I would write articles about cars, and I'm not a car freak at all. In fact, quite the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
So I would write these funny things, and it always reminded me of there's an old Soviet story called "How the Soviet Robinson Crusoe Was Created," and I think it's by Tinyanov or Ilfin Petrov. I can't remember which one did that. It's the Soviet Robinson Crusoe. Basically, they asked a writer to write about a story of Robinson Crusoe because they needed it as well. And gradually they'd start changing the story. The kids say, well, why this thing about the slave, Friday is not really a good idea, so you have to change it. And ultimately they have the syndicate there, and at the end they say, well, why is it why is it a deserted island? So you're sort of writing in between the lines all the time. That's, by the way, one of the problems of the industry, and I think a lot of journalists say that, is that too much the big brands are involved in controlling the message.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit of a problem. The small niche brands don't have much of a chance sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I've written for some people, and you know, I've written about, they said, well, can you cover this and that? And I said, yeah, but there's this watch, it's really beautifully done, and it's really a fine watch, one of the best I've seen. And then this too, and then this too, and then there are all these other big brands. They'd say, yeah, but the big brands are paying for this. And that's
a big
very shaky.
Which just brings me on to something, and you might not want to answer this, you might not. But how do you pick the watch on the front cover? Is that a paid thing, or is it you
That's
just
paid. We
okay?
call it, we say you sponsor the front cover,
Right.
and it's sometimes I was very, very happy when last year when there were actually two brands wanting to cover, and our project manager in Abbeville at Abbeville Press asked me, said, "Well, do you think we can go with Towson?" And I said, "Yes, please." Towson is a fairly known brand, but they make terrific watches. I just like their watches. It's sort of very classic American. Actually, it's one German who does it there. Balke is his name. They're two ancient watchmakers, and they were just bought by a young man who was he's like 21 years old. He doesn't even know how to write an email correctly. He doesn't even, sign it off properly. He writes the way young people write today. They sort of throw a sentence at you, and you're sort of, wait a minute.
I hope I emailed you
Oh
correctly.
yeah,
I don't know.
okay, we accept that. There's no dear Mr. Radkai, dear Martin, or hi Martin, sincerely. None of that. It's just sort of, but it's okay. That was our choice, and I'm always very happy when we have a good brand, and mostly we have good brands. We've had Jaune on the front cover. We're now doing a second Ball watch. They bought the cover again.
Yeah, I've got the
Ball makes really good watches.
Yeah, Ball was the
Classic.
2016. But
yeah, exactly. The Ball watch. And we have it. They're on again. We've had Beauvais.
Beautiful brand.
I try and avoid having a brand twice in a row because it looks like they own the book. I don't like that. We've had Ming. I was so happy to see Ming on the front cover. Wonderful watches.
Very
wonderful. They're sort of ethereal.
amazing. Kevin O'Leary has done wonders for that brand. You know Kevin O'Leary, the shark on Shark Tank in America?
Oh, yeah.
He's done wonders for it. He talks about it like numerous times on his YouTube show and other people's shows, and like it's one of those things like out of nowhere, all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, this is an interesting brand." People that haven't come across it before,
And they really do good work. I mean, it's a fabulous. So I like having those on the front cover, and it's sponsored. I mean, they pay a fair amount, but it's not much considering they're on 35,000 books. And I'm going to sell the book a bit. 35,000 books that are distributed through Amazon and through retailers who often give a book with the watch they sell, and you can buy it in public. And actually, an old school friend of mine got in touch with me because he lives in Singapore. He's a businessman, and he said, "Oh, I saw your picture in this book when I went to buy a watch." So it is distributed. It's a damn good book. I find, of course, it's my book. I'm not going to say it's a bad book.
No, like I will say objectively, like there's one, there's nothing else like it, and two, it is a really good book. Like it's just interesting. Like even if you're just starting a foray into watches, you don't need to know all the terms and every movement and things, just to like see and get a good breadth for what the cost of £20, $30, whatever, something like that. Just to get a broad stroke of what's going on and saving you clicking through the internet, and you're never going to find these brands. Like I say to people, like, I don't know how many brands you have in the book, but you'll obviously know better. But like, I don't think I know 80% of them, and I know a lot of brands and I know a lot of stuff, and I spend all day at this. So like, there's no way that most people that buy this book have ever come across most of those brands, unless they've read the book before. That's the only ones they would have done, and so it just opens your eyes.
And there's 600, I think there's 650 brands in Switzerland alone. And, some of them I'll be honest with you, and I'll say it in public, some of the brands I don't like, but I put them in there because they simply they belong, as I say, they need a showing. Everybody needs a showing for me who does good work.
I think we did slightly go on to it. Like, what's your criteria for putting a brand in there? Is it like, they're on your radar for a certain reason? Like, is it a feel? Is it again a bit of an editorial license where you're like a creative license where you feel like it adds a dynamic that's different? Like, is that kind of how it works a bit?
It's a mixture of things. I like mixing brands. Also started putting brands that don't sell expensive watches. This year I have the what is it called? The Kiev Ukrainian Watch Factory in there, because I'm not sure they make such terrific brands, and I don't even know if they still exist. They have been bombed out of existence. But I was actually in touch with them. I have a project with them that I'm thinking of, and it's just that I thought of it, and then I looked up. Basically, I looked up Ukraine watchmaking, and I found this. It's a brand, and it's called Kleinod. I looked at the name. I said, "Wow, that's a German name. It means it's gem or something." And I figured out that is what it means. Apparently, it's also a Polish name. And I got in touch with them, and I said, "Look, and I looked at their watch. I'll be honest, I didn't touch them because I didn't want to go to Kiev to touch these watches right away. I
I
also
can
didn't have
imagine
time. I would have, but I didn't have time. And look, they have a sort of very characteristic look, Ukrainian look. If you look at the numerals and stuff like that. I have Turbi in there. Sometimes the people will then buy an ad, which is we're really happy about, because the book it's expensive to publish this book, and to print it. So I have a Turbi watch in there because I met the guy. We were sitting together, and he explained to me his watches. He explained what his watch concept was. I said, "Good, Turbi watches." He's from a place called Veta in Germany. He's Turkish, so one of his watches has a Turkish thing in it, the numerals. God, why do I pick certain brands? This year, I even have Accutron.
you have
Okay,
to. Sorry.
Accutron, the first electronic watch. Well, not the first, but the first one that actually worked. It's an electric watch. It's not a quartz. It's regulated by a tuning fork.
Yeah. Didn't
Oh,
didn't what's his name do that as well? Oh my gosh, it begins. Is it with a B? The brand. It's on the top of my tongue, and I can't remember the brand. No, who was it?
yeah, I know which one you want. What you mean?
Who did
Bulova.
Bullover?
Bulova. They are Bulova. They're now
Yes,
a sort of sub brand of Bulova.
I
They're
thought
kind of
so.
separated as a sub brand.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things
No, I mean,
where I forget how much I know when someone says something and I'm like, I know that from somewhere. I can't remember what.
yeah. I mean, I chose Van Cleef Arpels. I put them in there. I had to. There was the PR department was so busy, they kept on ignoring me until I finally called the vice president of the company, and I said, "Would you please tell them to get their rear ends in gear? I want to put them in my book because they make beautiful watches. And even if they're sometimes a bit obnoxious, I forgive that because they make extraordinary watches. I mean, the Pont d'Amour is phenomenal." And it led me to an article on Jean-Marc Widerecht. So I always try and put a personality in the book as well. Last year was Pierre Fabre and those two extraordinary watchmakers, Clementi and Eric Coudray, who worked for this man. You got to read that article on not Pierre Fabre. What's his name? Got to, he runs 11 companies up in the thing, and hardly anyone knows who he is. He's
All
a
in
sub.
watches.
All he makes watches. I mean, look. Now I'm going to say something that I hope the industry I won't be, shot dead tomorrow when I go to school. A lot of these brands, these big brands say, we make our watches all in-house. It's all in-house,
Yeah.
it's all in-house. All
Didn't you
right.
ask about this? And
And then you visit this guy, and you see all the same brands up there. You just see them. The names are there. This is and this is
yeah,
and this is and they tell me, don't say who you are. I mean, what we're
who
doing
the
here.
brands? Yeah.
Yeah. The only one who did is, guess who? Artia, Yvan Arpa. When I was at Pierre Fabre, who now unfortunately died, a phenomenal watchmaker, and he had a little company. He died 2 years ago, last year, and he said, "Look, you can photograph here. Just be careful. Don't show the other brands that we're doing." And I said, "But Artia I can mention." He said, "Sure." Because Yvan doesn't give a damn. He knows damn well that his watches are not made in his office near Place Mollard here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he doesn't mind. So who got all the publicity? Artia, of course. But I understand the brands. They can't do all that work in one place. It's impossible.
No,
It's
there's
impossible.
no doubt about it. No, I think it was in and this book, I forget. But yeah, I read about that, and I mean, it's obvious that some of the work is it's too intricate, and you need like specialism of labor, and there'll be no value of having there's a certain type of person that can do a certain type of job, and of course they're going to do it for multiple brands. Like that's like any industry. This one, quite one of the things that needs to change in the industry, and this could lead on to a great question, is about brands being more honest and transparent about what's going on. It's too cloak and mirrors and that kind of thing, which is my final question, I think, for today, which is very nicely leads on. What changes kind of industry wide rather would you like to see / implement if you could?
Industry wide.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned one of them. I'm a man of words. But one thing I in the marketing is what often bothers me in the industry. I mean, they all do their watchmaking. I won't touch because most of them do great watchmaking. They have great stuff. Something in the marketing I find sometimes a little bit problematic. Mm-hmm. That's all. I mean, that's one of the areas where I notice I keep having an inner dialogue about.
What forget the brand name of the model, but like what kind of things, like the superlatives they're using to describe it, or like
okay. Yes. Sometimes for a while I got so sick and tired of hearing tradition and innovation. I said, because that is such nonsense. Everybody says the same thing. Yeah, you could say that about making faucets. You know, it's there's no. Of course you're going to innovate, and of course you've got a tradition. It's it's like it's too obvious. And I sometimes wish some of my income, very low income, which is why I can't afford watches, which is why I buy Soviet watches, old Soviet watches. One person actually gave me a watch, and I inherited an IWC, by the way.
Nice,
wonderful. The first ceramic one,
beautiful,
1994 with the Valjoux 7750. Beautiful watch. I love it. Small. And it works like a charm, and you can feel the around it. Anyway, one of my sources of income is every now and then, and recently a small brand sent me their press release for their next thing, and what I really had to do was reorganize it and cut out all of that superlative stuff. Also, there's a dissonance often between what they're saying is great and unique and what is really there. That is something that should be really careful of. I think that being understated in this business is the better choice.
Yeah.
More understated. We're dealing with a very dignified work of art, even if it's crazy stuff. There's some taglines that I wonder, why are they saying this? We live in an incredibly hectic society, and then you have this tagline, "Don't crack under pressure." My God. It makes me want to run, but that's me. It's very personal. No. Never stand still. That was what Tag Heuer said. That this kind of tagline is sort of like you're breathless with that. And for me, a watch is something different. It's enjoying time. It's looking at time. It's feeling time. It's thinking about time. Feeling this movement of time. What is time? You know, read Henri Bergson, the French philosopher who wrote a lot about time. You know, what is real time and what is duration? What is subjective time? That, for me, a watch represents all of that. It also represents the galaxy on your hand, because that's what it does. It replicates the movement of the planets, or at least of our planet. So there's a lot of, I think a certain dignity should be put back into the watchmaking. Fun as well. It is a fun thing. And yeah, I mean, don't fall. This is the marketing people. Don't fall for marketing trends in marketing. Like at one point they kept on saying this is disruptive. I mean, you look at it and said, no, it's a watch. It's not disruptive. It's like 18th century thinking. It's very empirical. It's rational as well. That's a little bit later in the 18th century. But you know, it's don't fall for that kind of trash. Just be yourself. And if you look at old advertising, I have a book here of old advertising, old watch advertising. It's very, very classic. It's a little bit like the building of your ancestors, your grandfather. It's solid, staid, it honors itself, you know, and even in a fun way. And I love that. I love the 19th century, the way some business people who had started a business could honor themselves in a dignified way. You know, they didn't throw parties, they did it well. And I actually wrote for World of Interiors on something completely different. It's a place in Dresden called the Pfundmolkerei. And it was one of my funniest articles that I experienced writing because it was the wall had just fallen, and I was down in Dresden finding this place. And it was actually a dairy. They actually made milk there. They took milk and they made condensed milk, which was very new, but it meant that the colonials could have milk in their coffee. And the guy made a lot of money. His name was Pfund, like pound in German. And he decorated his entire one of the big rooms with little patai, you know, little angels sort of pushing milk carts and stuff like that. And they're wearing this Pickelhaube, these German helmets with the pointing on top, with the American flags. And wow. American and British flags with all of the customers. They were this man, Pfund, in 1892, he honored himself with his business. One day we'll get together, I'll tell you the story of how that survived the East German government, but that's another story. Wow. But that's what I like. The staid, I like it. Other people don't need it. Younger people are different.
Very, very interesting. Well, listen, it's been a far-reaching and like I've had a great time. Hopefully you have too. Just like talking and I always say like I actually it's not that I don't care, but I'm not so concerned or with how many people watch this or listen to this or whatever. I just find it interesting meeting interesting people, hearing them talk about their opinions on things, how they've got into certain things. Of course, I'm super passionate about watches as you are, and it's just lovely to hear someone else's opinion on it, and particularly someone that's written or is co-author on these books that are going to have to show. So the Wristwatch Annuals that are like just full of like I've opened Hublot. There you go. There's one to really throw the cat amongst the pigeons. But
we could talk about Hublot for about a half hour. I mean,
I've
spoken to Bivet a lot, but he was extraordinary. Bivet is a stunning marketer.
Oh, phenomenal! Like, he's the best. He's just he's catapulted LVMH to like other heights, in watchmaking, and marketing, etc. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we will meet in person at some point, and maybe we'll have another conversation. But for now, I thank you very much, and thanks everyone for.
Thank you for inviting me. I was really honored by that. It was really nice.
Thank you.
And tonight I'm going to try and finish Wristwatch Annual 2023.
I look forward to reading it for sure.
Okay.
Cheers.
Before you order it, let me get you 1 cent, okay?
Oh, it's kind. Thank you, man. Thank you.
Send me your address on